He rises in Revelation 13:1 and has power over all kindreds, tongues, people, and nations. We've seen that with this nuclear program they just held in Washington, and he led the 47, and they came because of the respect for him. He comes to power through the peace pact. And here is Cairo, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Lebanon, Muslim nations, all saying, we want him to make the peace. Daniel 11:21, he comes in peaceably. Daniel 11:24, enters in peaceably and makes a 7-year peace contract with the nations. In Daniel 9:27, everyone is thrilled, but it only lasts for 42 months. Then Russia says, I'm going to go against them, like I said last week, who are at peace. So the peace will come soon, probably through our president. And then Gog, Magog, Meshech, Tubal, Rosh, all cities in Russia now make the march for the war in the latter years and latter days. There will rise a false prophet with him, and he'll create an image that will be worshipped in honor of the world dictator. And all the world worships him, Revelation 13:8. And we got Jesse Jackson Jr., who said, we're going to have to add an extra chapter to the Bible because of Obama. And Spike Lee, who said it used to be BC and AD, before Christ, after Christ. Now it'll be before Obama, after Obama. God help us with that kind of sacrilege. And Louis Farrakhan, Nation of Islam, said, a black father and a white mother produced our Savior. They're going to worship him. That's where the New Age movement comes in. Oprah Winfrey in that crowd. They all claim to be little gods. And Matthew chapter 24, verse 5 says, many, that's the Greek word poulos, millions will come in my name saying, I'm Christ. But Christ there is in italics. It's not in the original Greek. They'll come saying, I am, I am. That is their code word. And they're going to say, we are the little gods, but you, dictator of the world order, are the God over all of us. And he'll even believe it at that time. He'll magnify himself above every god, Daniel 11:36. And he'll exalt himself above everything called God, 2 Thessalonians 2:4. And then this religious leader worships him and gives a number, 666, Revelation 13:16-18. And right now the Bilderbergs, who created the New World Order in the beginning in 1954, plan to microchip every human being on Earth by 2017.
Can a microscopic tag be implanted in a person's body to track his every movement? There's actual discussion about that. You will rule on that, mark my words, before your tenure is over.
We need some system for permanently identifying people. There's got to be something better than one of these photo IDs. A tattoo somewhere, maybe. I wouldn't mind having something planted permanently in my arm that would identify me.
All technologies start in a neutral way, and all technologies grow in their power. The humble chip is going to be 1,000,000 times more powerful, 1,000,000 times more capable. So when you allow it to be embedded in your environment and even under your skin, you'd better be prepared for it to be a completely different beast.
And he caused all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666.
Last week, the head of the country's central bank floated the idea of dumping the greenback as the world's reserve currency, replacing it with an international currency.
Thousands of people gathered to hear Barack Obama deliver key foreign policy speech on his current European tour. His vision for America's place in a new world order.
Returning vets could be a risk to our nation.
We've got to give them a stake in creating the kind of world order that I think all of us would like to see.
And one of the ways it will drive the change is through global governance.
I think a new world order is emerging.
This is a hoax and a scam which is designed to transfer wealth and power from the private sector to the government sector and from the government of the United States to a world government.
And those people who have been yelling, oh, the UN's going to take over global
conspiracy theorists.
They've been crazy, but now they're right.
And who got the money? Hundreds and hundreds of banks. Any bank or that has access to the U.S. Federal Reserve's discount.
Tell us who they are.
No.
Well, in America today, we are getting closer to fully exposing the greatest con and cover-up in the history of this country. It involves our banks, the Federal Reserve, our Congress, and, of course, you and me. First, though, think of the Fed as the godfather in this con.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse. Now, just go outside, enjoy yourself.
The role of the Godfather, played by former Fed Chief Alan Greenspan, who appeared before the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission this morning, denying that he ever knew what he helped perpetrate.
The notion that we in any way favored any of them or basically were influenced with respect to policy by what they said, other than the facts they gave us, which we always evaluated, I saw no evidence of that in my tenure.
And he may not have had favorite among the banks because Greenspan was working for all of the banks against you. The bankers, of course, the unrepentant con men being supported by the Federal Reserve.
You picked him clean. He never missed it.
Remember that sting experience, how good you felt?
So good getting that money for free, getting away with it. Here's how the con went down. The bankers were operating under an implicit guarantee from the Godfather, the Federal Reserve, in the form of guaranteed low interest rates, guaranteed cheap money exclusively for the con men. Then, Chairman Greenspan, the Godfather, would agree to hold those rates, let's say 2% for as far as the eye could see. The banks, or bankers, the con men, would borrow that money from the Federal Reserve, let's say 2%, and then turn around and lend it back to you at, let's say, 6%. That encouraged the patsies, you and me, to be drawn into the con because 6% looks like a pretty low rate. Low rates for houses, low rates for cars. Heck, you could join a health club, make that on payments, they'll turn that into bonds, and of course, promises of a higher than average return for those managing teachers and policemen's and judges' pension funds that are buying into the con as well. And here exactly is where the con comes in. As you and I both know, the banks had no money. They were getting it from the Federal Reserve, which is us. It's funny money. They had no capital to back up their lending. But that did not matter because they also had no risk in the lending. If the lending paid off, they win. And they won big when they did that because they did it with leverage. Top Manhattan executives alone paid themselves $121 billion in bonuses over the first part of the decade. Now, mind you, when the bank loans failed, they knew they were too big to fail. So the rest of us, you and me, would have to bail them out. The ignorant electorate, if you will, the patsies, who had no idea, and really still don't, understand how badly they are being conned by our government and our banks. Once the banks, however, realized there was no losing, the question was, how do we make the con bigger? How do we get more money through this crazy machine so we can get richer? The question, or the answer, I should say, is simple. Make more loans, more credit card loans. Think of all the credit card applications that were sent to you over the past 10 years. More car loans. It's the reason General Motors went upside down. It wasn't the cars. It was because they were running a financing scheme. Home loans, you know the narrative. So the people most hurt by this con, the home buyers, the cops, the teachers, pensioners who were suckered in by the bait of low credit and high returns in exchange for buying worthless toxic assets manufactured by the bankers. That's why your pension fund was wiped out. That's why the interest rate on your savings to this day remains around 0. If you're a retiree, you know what I'm talking about. It's also why you're now drowning in a mortgage on a house that's worth far less than you owe, because the bankers were happy to lend you money they did not have to drive up the price of that house, because they knew the more loans the better, but no downside for them. So what's next? Higher taxes for us, higher interest rates for us, to pay for the bailouts, while our government that was theoretically elected by us refuses to recover the stolen money by the con men or fix the system that allows them to continue to perpetrate the con against you and me. Congressman Grayson, you mentioned campaign finance reform and the need to get the lobbyists out, because the lobbyists, the bank lobbyists, $344 million, a cut of the action on the con goes to Congress. Are you as cynical as that would suggest, that basically Congress knows that they should create transparency and capital requirements, which would end the ability for there to be a con like this, but refuses to do so because they're afraid of losing those checks?
I think it's worse than that, actually. We lived through an economic disaster, and now we're slowly recovering from it. We lost 20% of our national wealth in 18 months, the last 18 months of the Bush administration, and housing topped out 3.5 years ago, not just in Florida, but around the country, and nobody has been held responsible, not Alan Greenspan, not anybody else.
We live in a democracy where we're told we elect people who look out for our interests, and yet the same people are creating laws that allow this group to con the American people out of the largest transfer of wealth in the history of the world with no consequences. Are you suggesting special interests have so much control that our government literally is willing to facilitate that level of wealth transfer with no consequences?
I think that's a fair statement, and I would add to what was said before that we've got the creation of the idea of too big to fail under Alan Greenspan. We've got him gunning the economy through the Y2K money supply increase that led to economic disaster within 4 months. He made mistake after mistake after mistake, and what we never hear from any of these people is, I'm sorry. We don't even hear that. And I think it's because the system is enslaved. Yes, that's right. And the Senate bill unfortunately does that. The Senate bill takes whatever possibility there is of somebody who's actually looking out for the consumer and puts that in, of all places, the Federal Reserve as the one responsible to do that. The Federal Reserve, which is actually run by big banks, it's governed by big banks. They choose the people who occupy the seats of power in each regional bank. And yet we're going to be giving them more power.
Go ahead, Bill. The current financial reform legislation proposed by our government would give the Godfather, the Federal Reserve in this case, even more power to regulate the game. The con men, represented by the Wall Street bankers, of course, giving our Congress a cut of the action, $344 million so far lobbying against the bill, second only to health care. And we saw how well it worked out for special interest on health care. Home run. They got a guaranteed customer base with no reform. I'm sure the bankers will do pretty well as well.
If he were here, Mr. Speaker, in this time of momentous national distress, I would remind the President of the United States that he is not the leader of a party or an ideology. He is the leader of our country. It is clear the most dangerous special interest is big government, and President Obama is its lobbyist. In contrast to Americans' faith in themselves, every major piece of legislation proffered by the President and his Democratic Congress expands and empowers big government at the expense of the people. Possessed of a smug, cynical, patronizing view of Americans as dependents desiring state benefits, this arrogant administration and its enablers have defied the American people and bipartisan opposition in Congress to unilaterally jam through $1 trillion government takeover of health care. Why? For so many Americans, the answer is that this President and his Democratic Congress think they are smarter than you, want to run your life, and want to make government your ruler, not your servant. Such hubris threatens not only our health care system, it tears the social fabric and political contract of our nation. Instead of working for a more perfect union, the President's ideological obstinacy exacerbated the disorder and divisions within our nation and wrought a crisis of consent, one that put America's exceptional experiment in human freedom and self-government on the precipice of implosion. To do so, the President has the power, but not the right. Thus, he has merely scored a Pyrrhic victory over the American people.